Today on the BeerSmith Show, we have Mr. Jake Keeler to talk about Brew in a Bag, Brewing TV, and fly fishing. This is the BeerSmith Homebrewing Show, episode number 77, and it's early March 2014. Today's episode is sponsored by BeerSmithRecipes.com, where you can find thousands of beer recipes searchable by style, name, and rating. Share your own recipes on BeerSmithRecipes.com using our BeerSmith desktop or mobile app. Before we start this week's episode, I want to thank all the audio and video listeners out there. I launched a new BeerSmith video channel on iTunes right after episode number 76, and so many of you responded it actually pushed the video podcast to the new and notable section on iTunes. And for a short period, the video podcast was actually number 2 in all of iTunes land. So I wanted to raise a glass to all of you fans out there. Thanks again for supporting BeerSmith, and cheers. Now let's jump into this week's episode on Brew in a Bag. Today on the show, my guest is Jake Keeler, who many of you know. He's chair of the AHA Governing Committee. He's also chair of the Industry Subcommittee for the American Homebrewers Association. He's currently a marketing manager at Brewer Supply Group, as well as the former host of Brewing TV. Jake, it's fantastic to have you on the show. I forgot to mention you also have a website at 20acrecarcass.com, which
correct.
Maybe you can explain to me a little bit later.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to be here and to talk to the people on the internet out there.
Well, it's great to have you here, Jake. I was hoping you could explain to us. We were going to talk a little bit about Brew in a Bag today, I think, right?
Right. Yeah.
So why don't we just start talking a little bit about what Brew in a Bag is? Yeah,
so, I came across Brew in a Bag probably about, maybe 3-4 years ago. And at the time I was working at Northern Brewer and we were just paying attention to different brewing trends. And we just kept seeing more and more articles and forum posts and questions we were getting actually in customer service about Brew in a Bag. And so we decided to look into it a bit, and then via Brewing TV, we did an episode, and that's when I kind of fell in love with it. And it's basically all grain brewing, using sort of a hybrid of steeping specialty grains and actually doing a mash with traditional all grain brewing, where you get all grain quality beer. You get all the complexities of using a grist bill. Without using extract, so you get the complexities of what that brings to the beer, but you have some of the time-saving qualities and ease of use and simplification of equipment that you experience with extract brewing. So it's kind of a in between, I like to say, of extract brewing and full-blown all-grain brewing. That's kind of where it's situated. But it certainly was posed that way, at least in the U.S., as an in-between, as sort of a step up from extract to all grain. But I think now it's its own brewing technique, it's its own sort of subculture within home brewing. And as much as you get extract brewers that are graduating into all grain brewing by using Brew in the Bag, you have just as many all grain brewers who are now, reverting, so to speak, to Brew in a Bag because of those things that I mentioned before, the time saving, equipment saving, ease of use, and simplicity.
Yeah, I've even started doing some Brew in a Bag just because it saves me time,
Right. And that was the one thing that, we really touched on, we really pushed, at least when we were doing the episode on Brewing TV, was it's not so much about this method is going to produce a superior beer or superior results. You could argue that, I suppose, versus extract brewing to some extent, but then that gets a little fuzzy sometimes. And it's not about, I'm too intimidated to start all grain brewing, or I don't have the money to buy all the equipment. It's really about the time saving. It's about it in itself, by itself, not as a comparison to some other brewing technique, but what it is in itself. So, that's why it appealed to me, because I really just don't have enough time to do a typical all-grain brew day anymore.
Right. What are some of the advantages of Brew in a Bag? We already talked about the time savings, but what are some of the other advantages?
Yeah, number one is the time saving. That's always the thing that I talk about or try to promote about it. Second, it's simplicity of process. Depending on what you do, there's like any other brewing technique, there's variations of how complicated you can make it or how simple you can make it. But it's definitely much more simple than your typical all grain brew day, as far as the process is concerned. Um, the simplicity of your gear. So you need a kettle, you need a bag, you need a burner. But if you do like I do, if you make 3-gallon batches, you can get away with making it on the stove top. So really, like, you're really simplifying the gear that you need to make all grain beer.
So I mean, you could jump from extract to all grain without even buying hardly any new equipment, right? If you do a stovetop mini batch,
Correct.
like you were talking about just a minute ago.
Exactly. The one caveat to that is that you're probably going to need a 7-gallon or larger kettle to accommodate the grist, the grain, the bag, and then if you're going to do a full volume boil or a full volume mash.
Is that true? Even if you're doing a mini batch like you're talking about there?
I usually I use an 8-gallon kettle. It's actually right back there.
Other side.
Other side. It's right back there. I use an 8-gallon kettle to make 3-gallon batches, and I usually, for about a 3-gallon batch of BIAB beer, brew in a bag beer, I aim for beers that are about 1060, 1070 OG. And for that, I'm using about anywhere from 7.5 to 9.5 pounds of malt. And so to accommodate all that malt and roughly 6 gallons of water right from the get-go, I need that 8-gallon kettle.
Makes sense.
That much mass.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what equipment do you need to go from brew in a bag to, go from extract to brew in a bag? What do you need to start out if you want to, let's say you're transitioning?
A kettle, if you've already got a 6-gallon, 7-gallon, 8-gallon kettle, you're probably okay. You might want to get a slightly larger kettle. You're definitely going to need a thermometer of some kind. I've got a thermometer on the kettle there that you see in the background. It's a Blickman thermometer. But you can use a probe thermometer, just any old thermometer. But you're definitely going to want to be able to pay attention, a little closer attention to temperatures because of the mash process. That's something that you wouldn't necessarily be dealing with maybe with extract. You're going to need a bag. I've actually got my bag right here. I got this from bagbrewer.com. He actually custom made a bag for me. I gave him the dimensions of my kettle, and he made this for me. So you want to use a fine nylon bag. The finer the mesh, the better. So you're going to need a bag of some sort.
Yeah, I know some people that make them. I think they use like polyester shears that you get from
right.
Walmart for curtains, right?
Mm-hmm.
That work?
Absolutely. And so, I mean, the bag itself is not going to cost you that much money. The most expensive piece of equipment is probably maybe a slightly larger kettle. And that's about it. If you want to do larger batches, I would say a 5-gallon batch or, larger, you probably want to get yourself a propane burner,
right.
Which I think is a good piece of equipment to have just period as a home brewer. I mean, it's something, it allows you to get out of the kitchen, take it outside, brew larger batches.
So a minute ago, Jake, I cut you off, but you were talking about the need for an outside burner and perhaps some kind of cooling equipment.
Yeah, it's one I didn't mention was a wort chiller. That's also a piece of equipment I think that every home brewer should have, whether you're doing extract, 3-gallon brew in a bag, 20-gallon all grain. A wort chiller of some kind is a good investment, but a propane burner is definitely a good investment just because, again, it allows you to brew outside. It allows you to brew on different scales, anything up from 3 gallons to 20 gallons. If you're going to go all grain someday, you're going to want a propane burner of some kind, and then, like I said, a wort chiller, some kind of chilling mechanism. It can be a plate chiller. But I just use a wort chiller myself because for 3 gallons, very simple entry-level wort chiller does the job. You get that down to proper pitching temperatures.
Yeah, really. I was just showing a simple immersion chiller here.
Yep.
It's just a coil of copper and copper tubing, and you run a little water through it, and you're good to go, right?
Yep, exactly. And that's again, it's ease of use. It's you bring your kettle inside down to a to your sink or to your basin sink or your utility sink, whatever it might be, or even outside. You run the water through it. 10 minutes later, it's chilled down. So that's one of the beauties of the 3-gallon setup.
Well, Jake, can you walk us through the brew in a bag process? What does it look like?
Yeah, sure. One thing I didn't mention.
Sure.
And you just made me think about it as I was thinking about the process. If you're going to do brew in a bag, you're going to need one of two things. You're going to need a homebrew shop that can either get you the kind of grind on your malt and to get a finer grist, in my opinion, or you're going to want to buy yourself a barley crusher, so that you can control whether you have a coarse grind or a fine grind to your grist. And I was thinking of that because what I usually do is I run it twice through my mill to get a little bit finer of a milling and a finer grist. And if I'm at my local homebrew shop, I might run it through their mill 2 times.
Double milling.
And that's double milling, yeah. And that kind of points to something we'll probably talk about here throughout the interview. But efficiency is always a concern with brew in a bag. Can you get the same kind of efficiency as you can through your traditional all grain brewing techniques? And one of the ways to increase your efficiency a little bit is to have a little bit finer of a grist.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the barley crusher. I actually just did a review of that just a short time. It was about a week ago. I published a video review, and it's let's see. You can either get it from my main site, or you can go to my blog. I think it's still near the top of the blog right now.
That's the exact same model I have.
But yeah, I did a video review of it, and I've actually bought one 3 or 4 years before I even started. I bought them, and then I liked it so much I actually started selling them. So full disclosure, wow. I do sell them now, but
Great.
Yeah, they're amazing little device, and actually relatively inexpensive for a dual roller malt mill.
They are, and it's along with the wort chiller, propane burner, and a mill. Those 3 pieces of equipment are just they're lifetime investments as a home brewer.
Absolutely.
And so you should never feel bad about buying any one of those pieces of equipment. Those are going to pay for themselves very quickly for you and make your brew day a lot smoother. So back to a brew day.
Go ahead. Sorry.
The first thing I do is get my put together my grain bill, put together my recipe. I actually use BeerSmith to calculate my recipes, and then I put my grist bill together.
Thank you for the plug.
No problem. So I put my grist bill together, and then I find out what I need and go to my local shop or whatnot, and then I mill it twice through my grain mill. Put that in a bucket. I usually just put that in a separate bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket, like your typical kind of fermentation buckets or buckets you can buy at the hardware store. And then basically I collect the water that I need, and I usually start with about 6 gallons of water if I'm aiming to do a 1060 to 1070 OG beer. And I do a full volume mash. So I'm starting with all the water that I'm going to need for the brewing process throughout the entire process. So I'm not adding in any water or subtracting any water throughout the process. I'm starting with all the water that I need from the very beginning. Again, time saver.
Absolutely.
And then
you skip the whole sparge step, right? Eventually.
Exactly. Eventually, I skip the sparge step. Exactly. So then I heat my water up, my mash water, get it up to about 160, around there roughly. I tend to mash a little bit lower on the 152 to 154 side. It's just my preference for the beers that I make. So then I take my bag, wrap it around the edge of the bucket, dump the bucket into the bag. Now I've got all my grist inside my bag. And then I put the bag inside the kettle. Once I've reached about that 160 temperature, I turn off my burner. I put it in the kettle, and I actually use, and here the picture you've got there has got those paper clips, which is a great method. I've seen that used.
Yep.
I actually use a bungee cord and wrap the bungee cord. I just kind of fold
Just
the
wrap
bag
it around
with
the
lip.
outside.
Yep, just wrap it around the outside and put the bungee cord around. Same principle, just to hold it in place. And then I put the lid on, and then I basically let.
I want to bring out one important lesson that I learned. You put the bag in after you heat the water, right?
Yes.
Because I did it the other way once, and I put a bunch of holes in my bag.
I've heard, I probably only avoided that mistake because I heard somebody do it before. So I was fortunate to learn from somebody else's.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then I let it sit. The one thing though, to mention here though is that I've always had issues with the consistency of that mash temperature staying the same. Now, typically in an all grain setup, you might have that in a cooler that contains that temperature for the hour or the 75 minutes or the 90 minutes or however long you're going to do your mash. It's a little bit different when you're doing it in a stainless steel kettle. If the ambient temperatures outside are cold, if there's a lot of wind, that can affect that temperature staying at that 152, 154, or if you're doing a higher mash, that temperature you're looking for. So I've actually currently what I've been trying to do is investigate ways to wrap the actual kettle in some kind of insulation material to maintain that temperature.
I've used a blanket before, and it works okay. It's not perfect, but it works fine.
I just saw something in the new Zymergy, or the latest Zymergy. It's a gadgets issue. Somebody used a yoga mat, and they wrapped a yoga mat, and it was just about the right size to go around the kettle. I thought that's
I don't own a yoga mat though.
Yeah, neither do I. I'd have to go buy one.
You'd be shocked to learn that I don't do yoga.
But people use one thing that I think works really well. I just haven't gone out and sourced it myself. Is the insulation material they use to wrap hot water heaters. That's pretty much designed to do exactly what you're looking.
Now that's a cool idea. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, because that's what it's doing. It's keeping the temperature. It's keeping the water, at a certain temperature, and it's really protecting it from the ambient temperatures. Which, if you're outside, or again, I'm in a basement right now in Minnesota. It's probably 50 degrees in here, so it's pretty chilly. So that's the one thing.
Oh, here we go. I found a good picture. There you go.
There you go.
He's got it wrapped in something there.
That looks like it's got some heating elements to it too.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. That's pretty fancy one there. I'm just browsing Google. So,
so keeping that mash temperature consistent, I think, is key. And I've really done trial and error of how to goose that up and down. And I've found that it's a little bit easier on the stovetop, simply because you can control that flame and turn it on and off a little bit easier than you can with the propane burner. If you turn the propane burner off, then you've got to spark it back up. You got to light it. You got to get it going. There's less, depending on what your the name of the component is escaping me, but depending on how much you can adjust the flame and the oxygen intake into the actual burner. The Venturi device that controls the air going into the thing, the air going into the propane burner.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit less of a control over that, but the temperature thing is important because you want to keep your mash at 152 or 154 again. And I've had beers that have skyrocketed up to 160, and I didn't know it. I'd walked away, and I was trusting the thermometer probe from the kettle thermometer. And it was just reading a certain section of the kettle, which had become a certain temperature. But in other parts of the kettle, it was much hotter. And so I ended up...
I found another cool idea here. I'm going to throw this up here. There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Guy took a top off a cooler and put a big bag in it. And so there you go. You got an insulated one.
Wow. I'm totally going to steal that.
People are creative, aren't they? It's basically what we're looking for. Those of you who listen to the audio, we're looking at somebody took one of these giant coolers that you put soda or beer in, and they kind of rip the top off of it and just put a giant bag in it, and there you go.
I mean and that's the beauty of home brewing. That's exactly why we are, so involved in this hobby, and we love this culture, because it's these funny, goofy little inventions that people come up with to, solve these problems to make beer.
I think we all got a little mad scientist in us,
Yeah, I think so. So, keeping that temperature consistent, and then, once you do a 60-minute or a 70-minute mash, I usually do about a 70-minute mash. I try to extract a little bit more out of that. Then I just take the bag out, and that's a part that a lot of people ask questions about. Okay, when you take the bag out, do you squeeze it? Do you rest it on something and let the juices kind of flow back into the kettle, like that picture there? Or do you just take it out right away and you go right to boil and raise that temperature to boil? I used to just take it out, put it in a bucket, let it sit, and then I'd take it outside, dump it in the compost, and I wouldn't think twice about it. I just wanted to keep moving and moving and moving.
So you didn't worry about the runoff or drainage or trying to squeeze the last little bit of wort out of there?
I never did. And then my buddy Chip Walton over at Chop and Brew.
Sure.
Give a little plug.
Chop and Brew.
Yeah. He showed me a picture of he had put a mash paddle and a spoon across the top of his kettle. And then he just rested the bag on top of that. And he just let it sit there while he raised the temperature to a boil. And that entire time, the grain was just pushing down via gravity, pushing that liquid out. And so over the course of maybe, 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes, he actually collected a lot more of those sugars, those fermentable sugars, back into the wort. And so he gained a little efficiency, quote unquote, out of that. There you go.
He's got a podcast as well, right? Video.
He does. Yeah. Yep. He's got a video. He does
Chip
videos.
Walton, Chop and Brew.
My old partner on Brewing TV, and I thought maybe I should be getting some of that. Maybe some of that wort out of that grain bag before I toss it in the bucket. So now I've actually started doing the same thing. I rest it on I just use the same thing, mash paddle and spoon. I just let it sit there, and I let it go down, and you definitely see a difference in the extract. I did a test. I tested the bricks prior to doing it, and I definitely gained a couple points by letting it sit there. So I've kind of become a firm believer that maybe you should squeeze it, or maybe you should drain it, however you want to do it, but definitely get the wort out of that grain as much as you possibly can.
Now, what about the age-old question: squeeze or don't squeeze?
I don't squeeze.
You don't squeeze.
It's hot. It's not very comfortable.
I wear gloves myself, so.
And so do I. I wear gloves as well, and I just don't squeeze. I just don't want to. Again, I kind of, if I can find a way to just let it sit there, and then I walk away, and then because you have to raise the temperature to a boil anyway, so you've got probably, depending on your burner or the size of the batch that you're doing, you've got 5 to 15 minutes before you're going to reach a boil anyway. So it's really not too big of a deal to let that grain sit there and drain out, so to speak.
I think it's great. What's next? What's the next step?
Then it's just your typical brew day. It's, whether you're doing 3 gallon, 5 gallon, 10, 15, 20, it's the same as you would ever, go through a brew day. You've got wort, you've got to do your hop additions, you got to do your, if you've got adjuncts and other fermentables, you're going to work that into the mix, but it's just a typical brew day. And then pretty much once you get it to a boil, it's the same as making an extract batch, an all grain batch, whatever you're doing. And so, of course, there's an infinite amount of possibilities at that point. But yeah, so it's really the brew in the bag is it's up until you begin the boil. It's really about how you're extracting those sugars that you're going to impart into the wort. Are you going to do it through a mash? Or are you going to do it through extract? Brew in the bag is just one way of doing it.
Now let's talk efficiency for a minute. I know a lot of people are concerned that you're going to get lower efficiency with brewing a bag, or you're not going to get as much, which means you're not going to get as much sugar out of the grain. What's your experience with that?
The first couple times I did it, I I didn't have great efficiency. It was probably in the range of around 75%, and I typically think 80% is you're doing pretty well. And that my typical experience with all grain brewing is around 80% when things went well. So 75, I was like, well, it's not as good as it should be. So I switched to a finer mesh bag. I switched to double milling double crush the malts before I would go in. I extended the mash from 60 minutes to 70 minutes, and those three things resulted in hitting around 80% efficiency, give or take 2 or 3 percentage points. And so I think you get the same kind of efficiency. I
usually get very close to what I started with. I very close to what I get from a typical all grain batch.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's you see my cat in the background now. Again, it's if I got less efficiency through this method, that is actually a sacrifice I'd be willing to make. That's a compromise I'm willing to make for the ease of use and the time saving. And if I had to goose the OG with a little bit of corn sugar or DME, I'm okay with that. But that's me.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. Your time's usually worth more than $1.02's worth of grain,
Exactly. And that's another thing. You may use a larger grist bill than you would on the all grain. So you might start with a larger mass of grist to get, if you're going to get less efficiency, you may still actually get the same amount of extractable sugars that you were looking to get. So you still might hit your target OG. Especially
when you're starting out, maybe just add a little more grain.
Absolutely. If you have a larger vessel, a kettle, to accommodate a larger grist bill, why not throw an extra pound or two of two-row or some other type of base malt in there, and you're probably going to hit your expected gravity.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is doing a full boil mash. Is there any ill effects from working with 3 or 4 quarts per pound of grain instead of like 1.5?
I haven't experienced anything. But I do very simple. I want to preface that by saying I have never experienced ill effects from that. But I do I pretty much make pale ales and IPAs, sometimes porters. That's it. So I'm not. I was never I never had very complicated mash regimes. I never did decoction mashing. I never did step mashing. That wasn't part of my brewing process. So for me, the beers that I brew, those beers that are in the 1050 to 1070 range, ales, typically more hop heavy than they are malt heavy. Brew in a bag is perfect. It's absolutely perfect. But I don't think it's necessarily the perfect method for, if you're going to do an authentic decoction mash Pilsner, brew in a bag is probably not the method you want to do.
Right.
You're going to want to go the typical all grain route. Similarly with really big beers like barley wines and Russian Imperial Stouts and big Belgian beers, brew in a bag might not be the best method simply because the grist bill is so large that it might not be. It just makes no sense. It just doesn't make as much sense.
I was wondering, I haven't brewed a large beer with brew in a bag, at least not recently. But I was wondering if it might actually be better though, in some ways, because you get so much contact time between the wort and the actual grains. You're not just running sparge water through at the end.
Yeah, I think that's true. That definitely may be a factor. I've never brewed a large beer on brew in a bag. It's definitely on my list of things to do, though.
Yeah, maybe we'll get somebody to comment in or weigh in on it when we post the show notes. But
yeah, and I know that I've been on bag BIAB brewer.com and the different forums talking about it, and it's funny. I was surprised. A lot of brew in the bag people are like, they're hardcore. They're like, no, you got to go 10 gallons. You got to sparge that. You have to, just to the point of like, well, why aren't you just using a typical all grain brew system then? Like it struck me as the reason I do brew in a bag is because of the ways it's not all grain brewing. Well, I'm not trying to make brew in the bag a one-to-one substitute for all grain brewing, I guess.
Right.
To me, I regard it as different.
Well, I've noticed that some brewers are passionate about anything, pretty much.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think extract brewers even have very strong opinions about how you should be handling your extract and what kind of extract to use and when to add it to the boil. And
same thing with the guys that have spent $20,000 on a RIMS or HERM system.
Exactly.
They're pretty passionate about that,
That's the beauty of this whole culture, is that no matter where you fall within the spectrum of, you make a Mr. Beer kit to you're pretty much brewing on a nano brewery professional scale, you can get geeky about all those levels throughout the gamut. There's just an infinite amount of stuff that you can kind of get dialed in on, and that's awesome. And there's people out there that you can find that share that same passion. That's what's really cool.
Absolutely. That's what I love about it. One of the things I really enjoy, and I'm sure you're going too, but the National Homebrewers Conference is, you see it on display in spades,
Yeah, and it's, and every year it gets bigger and bigger, and it gets more diverse, which is great to see. I think you're starting to see a wider range of years of brewing and expertise at the conference. It used to just be, the hardcore, I've been in a club for 20 years, I've been competing for 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. But now you've got, people coming to the conference that, well, I've been brewing for 2-3 years and I just got into all grain brewing, or I'm just thinking about all grain brewing.
I think some of them come just because they like the beer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that too. It's a pretty awesome event. I mean, there's tons of education. There's a bunch to learn there, and then exposure to great beers. And then just to really, I think, that what really the reason I love going is the celebration of the culture.
Well, this kind of brings me to my next topic, which is I wanted you to talk for a minute. I know you're chair of the AHA governing committee, and I think I mentioned you also had the industry subcommittee. I was wondering if you could just talk about, maybe for a few minutes, about the state of homebrewing. Yeah.
Wow.
Small topic, right?
Yeah, exactly. I may have to get another beer for this. It's, in the last 10 years, I've worked in the industry for roughly about 10 years or so. And, you've just seen it just take off, just go like this, everywhere from, participants to the industry, everywhere. The AHA has seen similar growth. Membership numbers are up every year. It's really healthy. The conference keeps growing at exponential rates. The competition grew by, I believe, 63% this year.
And I know you do an industry survey every year too, right?
Right. Yep. And that's basically in the last 3 years, what we've seen is that the shops that we've surveyed that reported back have, on average, they've reported a annual increase to their revenue around 20 to 25%, which is huge. It's huge for any industry to grow at that rate year after year.
Especially in a down economy, right?
Absolutely. And that may have helped, when people had, we actually had tons of people when I was working at Northern Brewer that were, I'm unemployed, but I've got more time on my hands, so I'm going to brew beer. It's one of those hobbies that I don't think people, if they're passionate about it, they don't forego it. It's something they want to continue to do. And so, you have a very healthy industry that's growing. You have a very healthy, base of participants and consumers to the industry, but participants at large. And I think that is pushing. It's pushing everybody forward. You're seeing much more innovation in equipment and techniques. You're seeing greater and greater access to ingredients. You're seeing innovations in the way beers are being made. And we're also seeing that on the craft beer side as well, of course. But it's really pushing the envelope of where things can go. So, much like people like to talk about, a bubble bursting in the craft beer market, I think the same could be said about the home brewing industry. There's a lot of new shops out there. There's probably at some point a limited market, So you're going to be stealing market share back and forth. So, we went through this in the late 90s as well.
I was around in the late 90s when that happened,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the craft beer bubble that burst. It was the homebrew industry
No,
as
home
well.
brewing itself, yeah.
Yeah. It just got bloated. And then, with the fact of the matter where there just weren't enough people around to support it.
It was about the same time the stock market crashed, actually, around 2000, 99, 2000,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. Coincidence?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
Exactly. Homebrewing. It's the root of everything.
Well, once the
All the
homebrewing
ills
market
and goods of
crashed,
society.
the rest of the market just went down with it.
Yeah, exactly. So I hope we don't see that. And really that right now that story will be told as homebrewing kind of gets more into mainstream culture. If it can really sink its teeth or its claws into mainstream culture and stay there, then I think there's going to be plenty of pie for everybody. But we'll see if that happens. It's a hobby. At the end of the day, it's a hobby. So, hobbies by their nature are kind of fickle, and people come and go, and there's ups and downs. But I think for people that I would imagine the people watching this right now, and the people that have followed those other avenues, whether it be Brewing Network, Chop and Brew, whatnot, those are the people that are kind of sticking with it for the long term. So I think it's in everybody's interest, not just the AHA, but the industry, to build those types of participants, really foster those long-term relationships. We want people to stick around in home brewing. We don't want them to just give it a try once or twice and then walk away. We want them to get hooked.
No, I agree, absolutely. I can tell you, though, if the home brewing market crashes, I'm selling all my stocks. That's all there is to it.
Exactly. Me too.
Well, Jake, I also wanted to ask you a little bit about Brewing TV. What did you learn from your time on Brewing TV?
Boy, it was, I've done a lot of things in my life, and not just in beer and brewing, but in art and then fly fishing and different worlds that I travel in. Brewing TV is definitely going to be one of those things that I, late in my life, I'm going to really look back on and really just feel great about everything that we did with that, with Chip and Mike and all the guest hosts and the topics that we covered and the places we got to go. It was a really amazing thing. And, I think it brought a lot of new people into the hobby. And I think it gave a lot of people that were in the hobby something to say, this is why I do it. This is why I do it. It was to borrow a phrase from Michael Dawson, it was a nucleation point. It's something to kind of, for people to kind of come around and say, okay, this is saying what I want to say. This is defining who I am. This is defining what I'm all about. And that was amazing, just meeting people, around the country, around the world, that knew about it and had watched us and connected to various episodes or inside jokes, and just to have that positive impact on people and to help promote the hobby that way was just awesome. It's one of those things that if I've done nothing for this hobby, I at least did that.
Well, even now it's I think the top video podcast on homebrewing, even though there haven't been many episodes lately.
Right. We're long gone, but it has its lasting power. So to me, I take that as a sign that we got it right. We did it right. It still has that it's still appealing to people, and
it's timeless.
I feel like it is. And the topics we always approach the topics as, it's about the why, not the how. We didn't really want to get in too much to the technical aspects of homebrewing, because we felt like, go out and buy Palmer's book on how to brew. Go out and buy this book, that book. Go to this website. There's so many resources out there to become familiar with the technical topics. But we really felt there was a gap in talking about, why do we homebrew? What are the reasons why that you spend your weekend brewing with your buddies, or you brew with your spouse, or why you share your homebrew with your friends. I mean, that's really what keeps me connected to the hobby. It's not necessarily the technical aspects of it. It's the culture. It's the why. So
why do we brew?
I think we brew because we love beer. Number one, we love beer. And the fact that we can make some of the best beer in the world out of our garages, our kitchens, our basements is an amazing thing. It's just an amazing thing. You can't say that about a lot of other things in life. Food is very similar to that. You know, you can make a meal at home that rivals any meal you're going to have anywhere else in the world. You know, make it from scratch, or you know, from game that you harvested yourself, or vegetables that you grew in your own garden. That feeling of accomplishment is unrivaled. And to share a beer with your friend or your loved ones or a stranger for the first time and say, "Yeah, I made this," and they look at you like, "Seriously?" I mean, that's just a great feeling, and it's the same reason why I make art. It's the exact same reason.
Well, last question I want to ask you is, what are you doing now? I know you get this a lot, but what are you doing now?
Yeah. So, you know, I spend most of my week working for Brew Supply Group, based out of here in Shakopee, Minnesota. But we've got offices and distribution centers around the country. And Brew Supply Group's the country's largest supplier of malt, hops, yeast, brewing aids, and whatnot to the craft brewing industry. And we also have divisions in home brewing, BSG Handcraft that supplies equipment and ingredients to home brewing retailers. We've got a wine division that sells into primarily the California area, the Sonoma, Napa area, but and then we've got a craft distilling division. So that's what I do. I'm the market manager there, so I'm still doing marketing and loving my job. Get to travel around the world and do amazing things. And then my personal time, of course, hang out with my family, but then I've got a career as an artist. So I continue with my art, and 20 Acre Carcass, my website, that's where my art is, and primarily do art into the fly fishing industry. And so I do a lot of work in there. So, and then when the weather gets better, I'll be fishing. That's all. That's really what I want to do.
I'm going to put that up. It's 20acrecarcass.com. 20 is the number 20, and then acre, and then carcass.com.
Yep.
And I feature some of your art there too.
Feature some of my art, yep. And then sometimes every now and then I post about home brewing as well. So, those are really my hobbies: home brewing, making art, and fly fishing. Those three things, and they go together so well. So,
I love fly fishing myself too.
Oh, well, there you go. It's funny. Ken Schramm is a big fly fisherman as well that wrote the Mead book. So it seems like we're all in good company. A lot of the guys at the Brewers Association are fly fishermen too, but they're out in Colorado, so that's kind of a prerequisite, I think.
Yeah, that's my problem. I have to drive several hours to get to any good fly fishing around here,
Yep. Yeah.
Well, Jake, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Not really. I guess just the thing I want to impart on everybody is that home brewing is a unique thing, and it's not always about who can brew the best beer or how can you make your beer the best, but it is about those motivational factors of why you make beer in the first place. We all love to drink beer. Obviously, you kind of have to, but I always kind of challenge people to say, well, why do you do it? What is so special about this hobby versus other hobbies? And I think when you start to ask those questions, you have a more people are going to laugh at me. Mike Dawson's going to laugh at me because I'm going to say this: a holistic understanding of why we do what we do, because I think it's something special, and it's not just another hobby. It's you're a part of a community. You're part of a movement, so to speak, of people, around the world that have found this and fallen in love with it. So it's kind of a cool thing.
Well, Jake, I'd like to thank you for all the contributions you've made to the homebrewing community. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So again, my guest today was Mr. Jake Keeler, the one and only. He is chair of the AHA Governing Committee. He is also the American Homebrewers Association Industry Subcommittee Chair, and he currently works for Brewing Supply Group. Well, thank you to Mr. Jake Keeler for appearing on the show. I do appreciate all he has done and continues to do for the homebrewing community. You can find this audio podcast and video podcast as well as the BeerSmith app if you search for BeerSmith in the iTunes store. You can also find me on YouTube at youtube.com/mrbeersmith. That's youtube.com/Mr. BeerSmith. And finally, you can find all the shows, brewing articles, as well as my social media links if you go to my main media hub at beersmith.com/blog. Thank you for listening and have a great brewing week.